Text, I'm coming at you, Aaron Crew Juice Vaverka, and I've got Keith.
Giggity, giggity.
And I've got Gumby.
Yes, you still have me. You got me.
Yes. I'm always afraid I won't, but I'm so glad I do.
Yeah, man. Hello.
We are back after our summer hiatus, coming at you live right now online. Hello.
Hello, world.
Tonight we'll be talking about chastity and monogamy. So, quick warning.
I thought it was just about chastity belts.
Oh, no. That's only part of the conversation and the keys that exist for them. No. So, if you have kids in the room, usher them out because we'll be going over some sensitive subjects tonight.
I thought you were going to say usher about because Keith's here.
In sensitive areas.
But that was the follow-up. But before we do that, Keith, on our hiatus, what have you been up to?
Oh, God. I've actually been like pretty dang boring. Like I had like one more work conference in July. I went to Portland, but actually then I signed up for another one that's going to London in a month. So I guess I'm still kind of, and then I got another conference in January. That's just in Sandusky. So,
London?
Yeah.
Like London?
Yeah,
London?
yeah, they like the London.
Wow.
The one that's in London.
Wait, there's a London in London?
I guess it's not in London.
Wait, there is a different city of London.
It's not like London, Ontario. There's probably like isn't there like New London, Ohio or something like that?
There is a different London within London that is, I'm pretty sure, Rothschild owned. It's like, I'm dead serious. It's like
I believe you.
Off limits to the regular, parliament. So,
Yeah, but other than that, I mean, like there's been, kid stuff. There's a carpool. Like we're trying to figure out the whole like transportation thing. So like my son in high school, he's taking the bus downtown. He's like taking like a little like motor scooter or e-scooter, putting it underneath the bus seat for the last mile or so. So I was training him on the bus for a couple weeks, riding with him to get it used to it. Then we were arranging a carpool with the elementary school kids. So like 2 days a week, it's like 4 elementary school girls all requesting their songs from the back. And me thinking about what'll happen is it's usually my daughter, she will request a song and she'll be mad, because I'm just doing it with the voice, because I got like the new fancy car with the voice thing. I hit the voice button, but the voice button on my steering wheel doesn't work, but it works for my wife. That's a whole other matter. So I'm hitting the voice button. I'm fumbling for the voice button on the touch screen whenever one of these girls requests a song. Sometimes they don't even know what song they're requesting. They're like, just do the one that goes do 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 do, and I'm like, I don't know. I can't speak that into Google. So my daughter will tell me a song. I'll speak into Google, and she'll get mad because it plays like the wrong mix of it. Or sometimes like it'll play the karaoke version instead of like the Taylor Swift, like Taylor's version. Like if you don't say Taylor's version on a Taylor Swift song into Spotify, it plays the karaoke version. So there's like no words. There's no Taylor. There's literally no Taylor Swift in the Taylor Swift song.
Oh, that's interesting.
But anyway, so my daughter, she'll like request. This isn't that great of a story. I don't know where I'm going with this, but so she'll be mad because it's playing like the wrong mix of the right song. And I'll be like, this is like so much better than when I had it growing up, where we didn't get to pick the songs, playing on the school carpool.
Nope. And
suddenly that unlocked a memory of the last school carpool I was in. And we would go early a few times a week, me and my friend who'd live right next to me, to like a workout for like football practice. And this was back when I like watched football on the sidelines. I had a football uniform, but I watched football on the sidelines. That was my extent of being on the team. And his dad would drive us, and he would always play a Jim Croce tape. And the suddenly operator comes flooding back into my mind. And so now I'm like kind of weirdly obsessed with Jim Croce again. Like I just had to pull over and play a bunch of his songs in Spotify right after that. And I'm like misting up a little bit. Operator, won't you please help me make this call? Doo-doo-doo-doo. So I guess that's been my time.
That's better than
I don't know.
Awesome.
It's better than Tay. Come on.
Oh, yeah, they're both. I would if an AI generated duet between Taylor Swift and Jim Croce. I hate AI, but I would sign up for that.
It's possible. Yep.
So, before we get to Gumby, we're going to pour ourselves some root beer. This is not your father's root beer, and they don't.
Well, whose
have-
is it then?
That's
It's your mother's.
right.
Your mom's root beer.
your-
I drank your mom's root beer.
This is your stepfather's root beer. Yeah, this is they don't actually have a good about page for me to read, but it's 5.9 alcohol by volume. So it's got a nice kick to it, but you don't really taste it from what I remember. So let's go ahead and pour.
The people out there know what it's about.
Right. They do a fantastic job on the herbs inside of this, because when you whiff the top, that is definitely root beer,
Oh my!
like all day, and good root beer. Like that fragrance is just like top notch root beer, and then when you sip it,
Yeah,
that is root beer.
they did it
Oh
right.
man!
It's like it's
It's
so
good.
smooth. It's some of the best root beer I've ever had, and it's alcoholic.
They did it right.
So just fantastic.
Absolutely. The first time I had this, you know those like beer fests where you get like all like the tickets or the stamps or whatever, and you get to go take like 20 or 30 taste tests. I forget what those are called. But anyway, you go around and like there's all these different booths. And when I hit like not your father's root beer, like I just kept going back to that one. Yeah, I was pretty wasted on not your father's root beer because yeah, you can't taste the alcohol.
They do a great job. I mean, the herbs they balance in there are just phenomenal, and they do use real herbs
Oh.
as they're distilling it. So it's just fantastic.
It's not overly sweet. I wouldn't care for it if it was.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
That reminds
very well balanced.
So we might explore this later because of the drink I brought, but you know, we've taste tested some like off-brand, like Aldi brand drinks.
Yeah,
Mhm.
And like there's some that are pretty good, and we'll get to that later. But the equivalent of not your father's root beer is way too sweet. It is not right at all. Also,
Oh.
their cider is even worse than that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, don't touch it. It's like it tastes like, I don't know, rotten apple. Ugh.
Okay. Yeah, the
Sorry, Aldi.
it's all right.
Aldi's not
I
offended.
mean, did we say Aldi?
Aldi doesn't give a crap.
Oh, and we're sipping these tonight because we're celebrating the end of summer. Because the next episodes that we do after tonight will be focusing towards pumpkin ales and Oktoberfests and all that cool new fall flavor.
The scary stuff.
That's right. The spooky stuff.
No shortage of good stuff like that around here.
That's right.
Yeah.
Like, fall is Ohio's Super Bowl, I feel like, especially because we're never going to get to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, thanks, Keith.
So, Gubby, what you been up to?
Thanks for bringing reality home. Oh man, a lot of remodeling, music, yep, projects like that. Again, a lot of side work in.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. That's good.
Take it when I can get it.
That's cool. That's cool.
And music and life with kids.
Someday as a podcast, we're going to sit down and listen to you play.
Ooh, I'm here for that.
Like bring the keyboard.
Oh, we'll just show up to where you're playing.
Oh, I gotcha.
Do it live.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought we were going to do like a studio session. I'd be kind of
That'd
into
be
that
cool,
too.
I know.
I'll
Well,
sing.
you
Let's
play
do that too.
drums, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's do that as well.
Set up the drums for you, and I'll play the keyboard, and
There's a whole curtain behind us.
We
There's tons
get-
of room over there.
we get Aaron drunk enough, and he'll sing.
I'll applaud.
We could play some blues.
It only takes 2 or 3.
Mhm.
Nice. That's cool. When is your next gig?
I don't have anything on the books right now other than my steady gig at the church,
Okay.
which is actually this Sunday.
Nice.
Yep.
Nice. That's awesome. Always well played.
Yep.
That's cool. Yeah, outside of that, I just got back from a 3-week vacation. Well, actually, 3-week vacation and then a week teaching at Muay Thai Summit. So 4 straight weeks of activity. Boom, 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 boom. 2 weeks in the Philippines, 1 week in Thailand, and then 1 week in Pittsburgh teaching the summit.
And we are happy to have your voice, literally, yes, tonight.
Or what's left
Oh,
of it.
thank you, good sir. Yeah, some construction dust scarred up my throat a little bit, which is still healing. But outside of that, I'm fine. You know, it's just it was a little bit of
That sounds fairly traumatic. I thought it was just like a regular sore throat. That's rough.
Nope. It was
It was asbestos.
Yeah, it was from working on the house. So 2 ceilings later.
Ooh.
But I feel great now, which is fantastic because in the Philippines, I wasn't doing so good. I actually got a little bit sicker each day. When I hit Thailand, the first 2 nights I was hacking so bad, my wife almost took me to the hospital. But the fresh markets in Thailand are just phenomenal, just amazing. And every day in Thailand, I got stronger and better and healthier. And by the time we were done in Thailand, the symptoms were almost gone. There's their natural resources for drinks and herbs and juices is just phenomenal. I've never seen anything even close to that here in the States. It's amazing.
Mm,
So to get
bet.
adequate health care, we just got to fly to Thailand when you get sick.
I
Nice.
bet.
So
Yours.
ironically, there is, when you're filling your paperwork to go to Thailand, one of the questions is, are you coming here for medical care?
Oh.
Oh,
It's like one of those
Really?
red flags. And traveling, by the way, across the Southeast Asia, I found some things out. Like whenever you're arriving in the Philippines, you actually have to fill out a special form to let them know you're coming, or else you could get held up in customs and stuff. I think they have to verify why you're there, everything else. But if you fill out the form and you show up, you show it to them, boom, you go right through and you're good.
hmm
Thailand was not too hard. That was actually fairly easy. There's just a simple form you fill out and you show it to them as you arrive. So Thailand was even easier than the Philippines. But good Lord,
yeah.
I
That
spent so much time in airports.
I remember that same thing happened to me in Belgium when we visited over there,
Nice.
and I got held up in customs. And boy, did I feel like a terrorist, even though I wasn't. It had you second guessing yourself, like, well, maybe I am.
Right.
Maybe I am here to do something wrong. I thought I was just sightseeing. Crap, you guys are right.
You're questioning yourself. Did I pack a bomb?
Sir, you're just a little too dark.
Yeah, no, they were really cool. I will say, going through the Philippines and Thailand was actually easier than when I was coming back from Canada, coming back into the US. Man, us US people, we're mean.
Oh gosh, yeah. I was about to say, like,
Really?
every return flight is at least an hour and a half longer
Yeah.
because I have to add that extra layover because the US sucks.
Mm-hmm. It's
Hmm.
weird. Like you get there, they're looking at you like cross-eyed, like, why were you there? Vacation. Who do you know? I was visiting my buddy. What did you do? Dude, I'm a citizen.
Took a dump.
Well, why did you leave the first time?
Right.
To open up a McDonald's. Come on.
Oh, if you bring your kids through, they'll ask your kids, like, is that your dad?
Oh.
Yeah.
And then I'll have to be like, say yes, God, say yes. Come on. They're all scared and stuff. They won't say nothing.
Wow.
And they're like, they looked at us a little bit weird the first time because they're like, they saw my wife and I in line together. They looked, hey, is she with you? I was like, yeah, it's my wife. Okay, call her over too. Jeez. How do you treat people that aren't citizens?
Oh
yeah,
gosh.
crazy world, man. You can't be letting no box cutters get on plane.
Yeah, right.
Apparently, you can knock down democracies that way. All right, I digress.
I was gonna say it had to be related to eating cats or something like that.
I think they would have been okay with that.
Oh yeah, sure.
I don't want to get us banned before we started.
Yeah, right. Yeah, just again, US weird, really weird. Exiting not so bad. Entering kind of weird.
Mm.
Again, I really wonder how it is if you're not a citizen coming to this country, because getting in as a citizen kind of feels kind of weird.
I guess that depends on who you ask, especially on the issue of immigration, but we should save that for another.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a whole episode
Mhm.
by itself. That's definitely a whole episode by itself. But what we're diving into tonight is interesting. Hey, Keith, how do you feel about chastity?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, 30 seconds, go.
My gut, if you're just asking me for like immediate like word or thought association, I feel like it's been saddled with a lot of baggage in recent years. Like the close association to purity culture, which I and a lot of people, not far from my age, grew up in, where it would basically, for like the sake of national readiness, we were dissuaded from, we were encouraged to sign pledges to abstain from sex before marriage. So I
True
feel
love
like,
waits.
what was that?
True love waits.
True love waits. Yep, yep, absolutely. And then like you go through it and you're like, wow, I feel a little bit weird, 20 years after this. And then you go read like some history and you realize that this was like part of just like Reaganism, basically.
Mm.
So I feel like it's been saddled. Like there's something like interesting and primordial and essential and timeless there, but I feel very much caught in the moment when I think about chastity and related subjects.
Well, chastity and monogamy kind of go hand in hand, and we're going to see that when we go through tonight's episode. So there is a coupling, not to put puns in there, but there is kind of a coupling as you go through when it comes to chastity and monogamy. They kind of go hand in hand. So
I'm gonna say, are we gonna define it up front? Not,
Sure. So again, make sure your children are not in the room. So chastity, more or less, is keeping yourself for marriage. It's for keeping yourself for that person that you will spend the rest of your life with, and not messing around, and trying to keep yourself in a state that would be the best, most pristine, pure version of yourself going into a marriage, hopefully a monogamous marriage, where you can have less baggage in the marriage because you're not carrying things with you. So I cannot profess to have abided by that because I came up from a very rough background. But there is a lot of value in it, as we'll see tonight. So
okay, so that's chastity,
Yep.
generally speaking. Now monogamy.
yeah, so monogamy is when you marry one person and you are in a monogamous relationship. And you are not in a polyamorous relationship, or you are not in a open relationship, or you are not inside of a multi-marriage relationship. So
you have one sexual partner.
one
Once you're
sexual
married.
partner,
Okay.
yes.
I was like, let's define the word without using the word.
Yeah, and so that would be the defining characteristic of what chastity and monogamy would be. And they kind of, as you'll see as we go stage through stage, they kind of go hand in hand. And there's reasons for that.
All right.
So let's start with the Word of God. So the Old Testament says the concept of sexual purity is established early in the Testament. In Genesis 2:24, we see the ideal of monogamous marriage. Quote, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Unquote. This sets the stage for sexual relations within the context of marriage. The Ten Commandments explicitly prohibits adultery, which is from Exodus 20:14, reinforcing the importance of sexual fidelity. Throughout the Old Testament, sexual immorality is consistently condemned, as seen in passages like Proverbs 6:32, where it says, he who commits adultery lacks sense. He who does it destroys himself. The concept of monogamy is established in the very beginning of the Bible. In Genesis 2:24, again, that's that same quote. While polygamy is mentioned in the Old Testament, it is often portrayed as leading to conflict and strife. For example, the rivalry between Rachel and Leah in Genesis 30 demonstrates the challenges of polygamous relationships. Now, in the New Testament, Jesus reinforces and elevates the Old Testament teaching on chastity. In Matthew 5:27 through 28, he states, quote, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Close quote. This explains the concept of chastity to include not just actions, but thoughts and intentions. The Apostle Paul further emphasizes the importance of sexual purity in his letters. In 1 Corinthians 6:18-20, he writes, "Flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body." Jesus reinforces the Old Testament ideal of monogamy in Matthew 19:4-6. He says, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother?" This reinforces that same quote. And then the concept of celibacy for the sake of spiritual devotion is introduced. And this one goes into eunuchs. And this one I reference here as simply showing that celibacy itself, even outside of chastity and monogamy, is also identified as a sexual / non-sexual place that a person can be. So this goes along with the idea that you don't even need to have a mate through life. There are those who choose never, like a priest, for example, who choose never to be married whatsoever. And Jesus introduces that when he says, "For therefore there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let those who are able to receive it thus receive it." So again, you don't have to be married in life. You can choose to be completely celibate outside of chastity. And I wanted to make sure we included that to show that there is another avenue in life as well. Paul expands on this idea in 1 Corinthians 7:7-8. He says, "I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am." Now, to the unmarried and to widows, I say, is a good thing for them to remain as they are, as I do. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to be on fire. To the married, however, I give this instruction: a wife should not separate from her husband, and if he does separate, she either must remain single or become reconciled to her husband, and a husband should not divorce his wife. So this goes on to further passages. But before we go any further, I want to hear your thoughts.
That is a lot. Wow.
I've got notes.
You go.
Go ahead.
All right, I'm gonna
ahead.
go back way back to like maybe the first or second slide.
Can you go back to that?
I can.
I don't know exactly which one it was, but
Okay.
basically talking about polygamy and your comment that polygamy was kind of equated with strife in subsequent relationships.
That is true.
My interpretation, and I'm doing this based on like broad strokes.
Context or modern?
What do you mean? No, I'm talking about in the Bible itself, actually.
Okay.
So I'm thinking about all in general, just kind of like blobbing together in my head, all the occasions of polygamy in the Bible, which there's a lot. And
Especially in the Old Testament.
yeah, exactly. And I'm feeling like the overwhelm, maybe even if there was a case where there was strife in a specific instance, I feel like the body of work is very neutral on polygamy. Like it doesn't ever like whenever there's like somebody who's like, oh, it's just like he's got like 10 wives or 100 wives or whatever. Like it doesn't like say like that's wrong or that's bad in the middle of it. It's just like presented as a fact.
Yeah. So
You're saying because of the fact that there happens to be so much of it, part of the culture.
Well, I'm not saying whether the Bible is making a moral state. I'm like what I'm trying to say is like the Old Testament is shockingly mum on outright condemning the actual practice of polygamy, given the later emphasis of Christians and I'm presuming even modern Jews of monogamy. It seems surprising.
I disagree a little bit. There are numerous references in the Old Testament to having one wife, especially kings. There's explicit references to kings having one wife. When you get to the New Testament, same thing when it comes to priests and to elders of the church. One wife.
But David and Solomon, several wives.
Oh, they did. But that's not the way it was always supposed to be. Again, there's in Genesis, there's a reference to only having one wife. And then in Timothy, there's a reference to only having one wife. It culturally is what you're seeing more so inside the Old Testament than commandments. So culturally, a man would have several wives because if there was, let's say, there was an old version of a communicable disease that passed through the camp, and you lost, say 5 of your children, well, that's okay. I have 13, so we're going to mourn the ones that died, but at least our line won't be cut off. And that's culturally, that's why they would have so many children. It's actually not unlike what you see inside, let's say, third world versus first world countries here now. In third world countries, in the current day, people will still often have a lot of children because of disease. But if you get to a place like America or the UK, it's like, 1 or 2 kids because there's virtually no disease anymore inside first world countries. So if you look at the Old Testament, even into the New Testament, a lot of people would have multiple wives just in case there was disease. And there's actually references to that, to kings in Europe in the Middle Ages and having multiple children in case there was disease. So it was more a cultural thing than it was anything else.
So culturally speaking, in the Old Testament, my question is, if any person, whether it was part of the priesthood or not, if you had multiple partners, did they automatically become your spouse, your wife, even if you didn't go through some kind of ceremonial marriage, or when does the act of sex itself make that person your wife? Let's say.
It kind of varies from culture to culture, even in Mesopotamia. It kind of varies from culture to culture. And actually age from age. Like if you go to, there was a very old priesthood in the Bible before there was a Levitical priesthood. And some of the laws passed through into the Levitical priesthood. There's references to that. That would, good Lord, that's a whole episode by itself, going into the pre-Levitical priesthood of the Bible, because there are echoes of it throughout the Old Testament. In fact, there might be echoes of it in the New Testament, because Melchizedek was probably part of the old priesthood. So there's actually references to it even echoing into the New Testament. But it's very interesting when you look from age to age and how the laws themselves even change a little bit. It probably was based more around culture in the older priesthood than it was, because once you get to the newer laws of the Old Testament, which are a lot of them are based on Hammurabi. The laws are on Hammurabi, but there's more ceremonial laws, obviously, inside the Jewish version of those laws. But again, you're looking at different versions, like the Canaanite laws are going to differ a little bit from, say, the Ugarit laws, from the Akkadian laws. So even inside of Mesopotamia, you're going to have some differences from culture to culture, and some of them would come into the camp. There's a lot of, like Caleb, for example, was out of one of the other tribes, and he was welcomed into the tribes and became a big part of the early culture inside of the Torah. So you can even see that playing a little bit. So did he introduce some of his culture as he came over? And you see some of that back and forth. Solomon famously had 700 wives and 300 concubines, right? And you see him changing a little bit throughout his story, the more wives he has introduced. So you're going to see some of that change from person to person, even through their own life.
Yeah.
So
I think some of the concept around what Keith was talking about in the beginning, like the whole true love waits kind of thing, that aspect. Saving yourself is like holy and
Mhm.
set apart for another person, that kind of idea. When I think of like the Levitical tribe when they were in exile, right? In
Yeah.
Babylonian, and then they came back, and I forget which prophet that was in control over the Judahite tribe at that time when they came out of Babylonian. They came back to conquer under the Persian Xerxes or something. Anarxes, I can't pronounce his name.
Xerxes.
Yeah, Xerxes. Oh, there you go. But whenever they came back out of the Babylonian exile and they imposed their strict marriage laws on the tribe of Judah,
Mhm.
uh, they did it. It seemed for different reasons, not necessarily because of being pure or they don't want you to have quote unquote fun, but they didn't want assimilation.
Yeah.
They were not trying to assimilate with, the Canaanites or with other tribes. They wanted a strictly, uh, I don't know how else to say it, a pure Judahite race, right? They were
Yeah.
striving for that. And so they
They
came
were.
back and they literally imposed these laws on them. And they say, and the people wept
Mhm.
because they had, by that time, after so much time had passed, they had assimilated with other cultures. It's natural to do that, and marriages and families are broken apart. Whenever the leaders go back to Babylonian, again, assimilation happened naturally.
Yep. And that does happen, and you do see that shifting across the Bible.
So it seemed like the laws were almost like, I'm not saying to squash the fun for all the people, but the leaders,
Mhm.
David's and your Solomon's, they always had these rules, but it almost seemed like really strict for them.
Yeah.
But then they can have as many marriages, whether they were political or not, but then concubines on the side.
Yeah. And again, if you go into, and I didn't pull those passages, but if you go into those, it expressly says that kings should not have multiple wives. And that's one of the main reasons why, is so that way they aren't being pulled apart by all those various relationships from the other kingdoms. There's your kingdom will suffer when you're dividing it among various kingdoms, right? Because now you're divided. Now your devotions are divided with this kingdom and that kingdom and that kingdom and that kingdom. And
Mm.
so you will be divided. And that's probably one of the main reasons. Again, if you go through this there's political things that happen. Well, for example, as Solomon started worshiping, well, we'll put that lightly, paying respects to other wives, gods, and stuff across the Old Testament, started allowing some of those idols to be brought in to his own kingdom because he was trying to keep other kingdoms happy and keep their wives happy. And he wanted political relations with these various kingdoms. And that's that. Everything starts to go downhill very quickly once he allows that.
Mm.
So you see that divide and those problems happening right away. And we should learn from that. And also throughout the Bible, there's a reason why it says to marry virgins. And it says that from the Old Testament into the New Testament. And one of the main reasons, obviously, would be for disease. That's obviously one of the main reasons is disease. But another one would be you don't want to create additional families, because once you're creating additional families, now your devotion is divided. And now this family might die because you're more devoted to the other family, right? So there's definitely a lot of that going on back and forth. Kind of like if you look at Rachel and Leah, and you look what happens in that whole story, that's very convoluted, right? And you end up with the two different tribes happening, and very convoluted story that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't done that.
Mm.
Kind of putting together what both y'all were saying, like kind of where I was going with that, initial comment was I was reading this really interesting book and I can only remember like vague details about it, but it's called The Creation of Patriarchy
Okay.
by Gerda Lerner. It's actually the first volume and it literally goes into excruciating detail trying to track down like when men started subjugating women, like, and very specifically in the context of the Mesopotamia. Like she was like, yeah, there was too much information, like literally in, before 080. I'll get to the second part in another volume. But she was going through from like pre Hammurabi's code to Hammurabi's code to the Bible, and like a lot of these Bible stories, about like you're taking a concubine when your wife can't doesn't get pregnant or whatever, or these other the first brother dying and then the second brother siring a child, or is basically it was all very reflective of codes like Hammurabi's code and its predecessors and the codes right after it. So it was very reflective of Mesopotamian culture.
Mhm.
So
It's true.
and the fact that it doesn't really offer some commentary on it, like it has me feeling like I wonder sometimes if we read too much into it to look all the way back into the Old Testament and to see a clear line to monogamy, because it feels very much like they're writing in the present just based off of what the cultural norms are. Like this is just how you do it. And getting into like why they do it like they do it. Like all of like prehistory into history, see, and everything we do around sexual relationships and marriage seems to be oriented around property. You're ensuring that there's a son to inherit. You're ensuring that the father's land transfers to the son. You're ensuring this. Basically, if you have the women, you have the power. If you have the ability, the enforcement. I'm trying to think of the word. Whatever. If you manage procreation, you own the empire. And then that gets into like where like Hammurabi's code like is seen as like civilizing. For instance, you see a lot of regulations along like if a man commits adultery with your wife, what is the penalty for the man? What is the penalty for the woman?
Yeah.
And like you're starting to see like enforcement, and I think this is what you're kind of getting to, where like society, like you can't have empire if everybody can take a bunch of wives and accumulate property across a bunch of families. Like you actually have to like keep like the like common man in common man position, which then gets back to the king, so the kings can do whatever the heck they want.
Yeah, but that gets reformed if you look under Jesus. Again, if you just listen to his quote, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female and said, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife. And that is singular in the Hebrew and the Greek. And the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. And so he defines it as much more of a spiritual journey for two people becoming one flesh. And goes on to say that do not let them separate it. And then it goes into the New Testament, and Paul expands on that in that same concept. Jesus himself says, don't even think about committing adultery or having fornication. Paul expands on fornication, right? So all throughout the New Testament, it gets much deeper into the spiritual side of it.
Yeah. It's definitely less political too.
Yeah. It's more based towards your personal journey, which kind of takes us into the church fathers. So,
Wait, I got one comment before you do that though.
oh, go ahead.
David kind of broke the mold though. I mean, because the Bible is very clear in the Old Testament that there was nothing political about his ambition with his fall.
Mm-hmm.
He tried to maneuver things after the fact politically, by sending her husband on the front lines to die in battle so that, she wouldn't have a husband anymore and he could take her. But it was completely out of lust.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we should learn from that.
And he really didn't think twice about it.
That's true. He did mourn his actions after.
For
But,
sure. Yeah.
yeah.
And I will agree, like David and Solomon follow a similar arc where as they like take more wives, as they kind of like let their guard down, that things like they kind of like fizzle. They're not like neither of them are kings who like end on top.
They don't at all.
True.
Some of their sons do, but they do not.
I know how he gets still named as the wisest man ever. Or, David is often referenced just as
All
a
he
man
did was
after-
split like one baby.
That's it.
Good Lord. But if you go into the church fathers, like Saint John Chrysostom viewed marriage primarily as a means for chastity, stating, he said, "These are the two purposes for which marriage was instituted: to make us chaste and to make us parents." He saw sexual disobedience as a threat not just to individuals but to the entire church community. St. Ambrose of Milan reinforced the permanence of marriage and the importance of fidelity. He said, "No one is permitted to know a woman other than his wife. The marital right is given you for this reason, lest you fall into the snare and sin with a strange woman." And the Catechism of the Church of the Catholic Church, drawing on these earlier teachings, defines chastity as the successful integration of sexuality within the person and thus the inner unity of man in his bodily and spiritual being. It emphasizes that chastity is a virtue for all Christians, whether married or single. So again, see how monogamy and chastity kind of go hand in hand. So it's very interesting once we get into this. Justin Martyr said, and we see men also keeping themselves virgins, some from the first and some from a certain time, so that their means, marriage made lawless through lust, is destroyed. Cyprian of Carthage praised celibacy. He said, "The church, crowned with so many virgins, flourishes, and chastity and modesty preserve the tenor of their glory." Jerome said, "For me, virginity is consecrated in the person of Mary and Christ." Ambrose of Milan reinforces it also, saying, "No one is permitted to know a woman other than his wife." I think I already. Okay. "The marital right is given you for this reason." This one was the full quote. "If you are bound to a wife, do not seek a divorce, for you are not permitted while your wife lives to marry another." So again, these two travel back and forth. Monogamy and chastity really go hand in hand with each other.
That's a tough one for Catholic women. I can name you many who, stayed within marriages where maybe like the husband wasn't that faithful,
Mhm.
but because of that, they feel
Yeah.
i- obliged to stay within that marriage.
The church does allow for a disillusionment of a marriage without calling it a divorce if there is abuse involved. So there is that. It does allow for that. I've known people
Mhm.
who had to go through that, and the church did allow them to remarry. They annulled the marriage due to things like abuses.
Mm.
So
We saw the similar effect though with pre no fault divorce laws. So a lot of a common um conservative talking point is that, like, the downfall of society happened with no fault divorce and then a bunch of other things. And I'm parodying it, of course. But my bigger point is that there was a lot of divorces after that, but that was because you could get out without having to prove before a court that there was something bad enough that you had to get out. It wasn't like just a bunch of women, like, frivolously being like, "I don't wanna be married anymore." Like,
Yeah.
there was the regime of you have to, like, prove something bad happened or really bad happened or a certain level of bad happened. Like, that has a silencing effect where a lot of people just don't come forward because they're like, "Well, it's so hard to prove it that I might as well just stick it out," even if there is abuse. And I think there's potential for that to even happen with, annulments. I mean, I think
Mm.
Pope Francis has made some reforms in that area where, like, there's less costs involved, there's less bureaucracy involved. So there are some things, some previous roadblocks that are reduced, but the notion that there's, like, very specific considerations under church law, I think could have the same quieting effect, for women to speak out and get out, as lack of no fault divorce laws.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of that comes down to the local bishops because the local bishop is the one who has to deal with the cases.
Yeah, imagine if your bishop was like freaking Bishop Strickland or something. You'd be screwed. I mean, thank goodness he's no longer a bishop, but, um,
I mean, honestly, we can see why these values go hand in hand, but why they're so, um, I think, crucial to our time today. I mean, it couldn't be more evident, I think, when it's allowed to go the other way, it's such a slippery slope
Oh yeah.
of, quote unquote, what's free and what's freedom to do whatever you want. You get the P. Diddy's of the world, the Weinsteins of the world.
Yeah,
I'm being serious. And like Ravi
true.
Zacharias, who's one of the biggest Protestant theologians of the world, who's just as bad as Weinstein.
Oh yeah.
So,
You're not wrong.
the values have their place for sure. And I
Yeah.
think that's why they may seem so stringent, quote unquote, but they certainly, I think they act as a great balancer to what we're seeing today and
Yeah.
what we have to wrestle with today.
That's true. And that's the spiritual side of it. But what if the spiritual side was proved right by studies?
Oh, scientific
All
study.
right, let's see some studies. I want to see some numbers.
So there is an impact on pair bonding. Research on prairie voles, which from monogamous pair bonds similar to humans, has shown that prior sexual experience can affect future bonding behavior. Voles required a 4-week separation period from their first mate before being able to form a stable bond with a new partner. This suggests that previous sexual relationships may impair the ability to form strong bonds in the future. Additionally, the study found that mating latency only affected partner preference for second partners, not first partners. This indicates that sexual history shapes subsequent bonding in ways that don't apply to first-time pair bonds. There was a similar study that was done to this one, and I couldn't pull it. I have it somewhere in my notes. There's a similar study that was done on humans, and they found that with each subsequent partner mates had with each other, couples had with each other, there was a decrease of oxytocin and serotonin inside future partners, which of course is what causes pair bonding. Pair bonding, the closeness you feel to a mate it's directly reflected in your oxytocin and serotonin levels, and it goes down with each subsequent relationship.
Detached,
Mm-hmm.
spiritually, emotionally, even physically detached.
Yeah.
I mean, the
It's-
porn industry couldn't survive if that didn't exist.
Yeah. And infamously, if you do pull up couples that have been in the porn industry, they wroth with divorce rates.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lucky if they ever find anybody that they're with for more than a year. So there's reason for that. So there's ramifications of multiple sexual partners in this study. So substance dependence. The study found a strong association between having multiple sexual partners and an increased risk of substance dependence disorders. This relationship was particularly pronounced for women.
All right, tell me who's doing the study. I need some names.
I actually have the full link at the end of this.
Okay.
Anxiety, depression. There was no significant association between the number of sexual partners and later anxiety, depression after adjusting for prior mental health status.
Oh.
But gender differences, the association between multiple partners and substance dependence was stronger for women than for men. And there was a persistence of effects. The relationship between multiple partners and substance dependence persisted even after adjusting for prior substance use and mental health problems. There was an increased substance dependence risk. Individuals, especially the women in the relationship, and again, this was a peer-reviewed study, who engage with multiple sexual partners are at a higher risk of developing substance dependence disorders. And there was a long-term impact. The effects of having multiple partners on substance dependence risk were observed across different age periods, 21, 26, and 32 years, suggesting a long-term impact. Dose response relationships, the study found that as the number of sexual partners increased, so did the risk of substance dependence. So again, there's your link at the end right there.
Okay.
There was coping mechanisms deployed as coping strategy for dealing with the emotional consequences of multiple short-term relationships. There were society factors. The stronger association for women might reflect social double standards or different emotions experiencing in sexual relationships between genders. There was a risk behavior in clustering. So there was multiple sexual partners and substance use may be part of a broader pattern of risk-taking behavior. So that could have actually been reflected in the women who had multiple sexual partners. It may have been more latent inside of their own mental instabilities. That was also assessed. And there was a public health implication. The findings suggested that sexual health interventions should consider the potential mental health consequences, particularly substance dependence associated with multiple sexual partners. So, and then, of course, the study, like most studies, suggested that there should be more follow-up studies to find out more of what the root causes were. But it did show that there was these riskier behaviors for people who do engage in these multiple sexual partner experiences.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So did it make any difference? I have a ton of questions, but did it make any differentiation between, like, say, having multiple committed relationships of your life versus having, like, kind of, transient, ephemeral sexual partners?
So most of these were geared towards, and this was a fully heterosexual study. I did read up on that part of it, but it was more geared towards people who were more involved, like you say, the hookup culture.
Okay.
So
We are talking about, like, because I think that's where a lot of these conversations come between, like, true love waits and, like, no holds barred.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
usually, like, yeah, I could see if you are engaging in actually, like, inherently sexually, like, even, like, mainstream would consider that sexual, like, risky sexual behavior.
absolutely.
You if you're doing one night stands, you're probably doing the things that lead up to one night stands, which are usually involve, some kind of substance. Um, you are there's, like, things that it's not really clear to me what would be the cause of the other at that point.
I do think that you do see a slight correlation with the first study into the second study, because if you have a greater detachment across multiple relationships, you're looking again for that first feeling you had in the first relationship, right? Like people who talk about cocaine, right? They're like, oh, the first hit was the best one, right? And then you keep doing cocaine because they want to find that first hit again, right?
Yeah.
So I believe if you look at these studies side by side, you do see a correlation in these.
So wait, there were two studies in there?
Oh yeah. So the first one was based on actual biological studies in voles.
Oh, that one. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, gotcha.
So the first one was based specifically towards an animal group whose immune systems reflected a humans, because they wanted to see if they could corroborate the same kind of findings. The second one is based upon people who are more involved in the modern day hookup culture.
Okay.
So
So I feel like, again, like, the audience that we're actually, like, thinking about when we think about, like, quote unquote normal multiple sexual relationships, they're neither voles nor are they serial hookupers. They are people who enter over their lives multiple committed relationships that don't necessarily lead to marriage, but have a sexual component at some point.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that would be the really key study there, because I see there's a few things that I think they're kind of, in a way, pretty unique today to, like, American culture. So number one, the wreckage of purity culture, of the purity culture movement in the 90s and 2000s, was that a lot of people felt like damaged goods if they had more than one partner. So they literally feel unworthy, like, in front of their, like, future spouse or current spouse or whatever, when they
That was
finally find the person.
literally the word or the phrase that they use, damaged goods.
Exactly.
which
Yeah,
is not
it-
helpful.
And
Right,
you had
right.
to confess that
It's not helpful.
Yeah.
as if it was original sin or something, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, just damaged goods.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's not helpful.
So when we find that if we find that someone entering the second relationship, or someone who's had multiple relationships, that isn't necessarily that hookup culture audience we were just talking about.
Right.
When we find them and they find that they have, like, decreased satisfaction, increased mental health issue, like, whatever these adverse outcomes are, um, some of it seems like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell people over and over you're bad,
Yeah.
if this sequence of events happened in your life that led to this, like, they're going to think that they're bad.
Yeah.
And that's going to impact them mentally. And, like, just reading, I don't know of a conclusive study about this, but just reading the testimonies of folks who either have escaped purity culture, who never entered into it, this whole idea that they would be damaged goods because they had a sexual partner in the past that wasn't their current spouse, would have never entered their vocabulary. Like, it was like, if you never had, or you got rid of those thoughts that told you that you were unworthy because of that,
Yeah.
like it wasn't really a factor anymore.
I
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, I think that damaged goods is definitely something that's not helpful.
Again, going back to the idea of being set apart and, holy though, because what that purity culture taught was you have to save yourself. You have to save yourself. And there was no room for any mistake of your humanity. Like if
Yeah.
you actually just made a mistake,
Yeah.
and if you did, then you were irredeemable in that sense.
Yeah, that's too extreme.
And you could never ever reach any kind of fulfillment sexually speaking.
Yeah.
That may or may not ever be expressed to your power.
Yeah, the metaphor of the ripped off tape, that the tape would not retain its stickiness. Like you couldn't be as sticky to your next
Yeah.
lover because of the first one.
And nor can you ever enjoy. Like
Yeah.
that's bad.
Yeah, it's a little bit
You can't enjoy it.
it's a little extreme on that side of it. Yeah.
So-
and I'm not advocating for that culture.
Okay.
But there was another study on pair bonding.
Oh gosh.
And I'm going to prove you wrong
And-
anyway.
And this one actually related to both just mammal and human. So this one was a relation, and they were trying to relate the two back and forth, and it was actually more on an evolutionary side. So they said the neurochemical basis of bonding. The study highlights the roles of oxytocin, dopamine, and vasopressin in pair bonding formation and maintenance. On the evolutionary origins, pair bonding mechanisms are rooted in mother-infant bonding processes. And then stages of bonding. The article describes the progression from attraction to bond formation and long-term maintenance and cross-species similarities. Many bonding mechanisms are shared between humans and other mammals, particularly monogamous species like prairie voles.
Those damn chase prairie voles.
Based on the neurological mechanisms described in the study, we can infer some potential impacts of having multiple sexual partners. Altered oxytocin response, repeated bonding, and separation with multiple partners might affect the oxytocin system, potentially impacting future ability to form strong selective bonds. There was the dopamine reward system. Frequent activation of the dopamine reward system with different partners could potentially lead to desensitization or altered reward processing in future relationships. Partner recognition. The study emphasizes the importance of selective recognition in bonding. Multiple partners might complicate this process, potentially affecting the strength or selectivity of future bonds. Then there is the vasopressin and jealousy, as vasopressin is linked to male guarding behaviors. Experiences with multiple sexual partners might influence jealousy response in future relationships. Bonding difficulties. Repeated pair bonding formation and dissolution might make it more challenging to form stable long-term bonds in the future. Emotional attachment issues. The neurochemical processes involved in bonding might be affected, potentially leading to difficulties in forming deep emotional attachments. Altered reward perception. Changes in the dopamine reward system could affect how rewarding future monogamous relationships feel. There you go. Trust and jealousy concerns. Experiences with multiple partners might influence trust dynamics and jealousy response in future relationships. And then there is parental impact. As the study links pair bonding to parental bonding mechanisms, there should be potential impacts on future parenting behaviors or parent-child bonding. It is important to note that while these potential ramifications can be inferred from the neurobiological mechanisms described, the study does not directly address the impact of multiple sexual partners. Human relations are complex and influences. This is the little nuance on the end. So in other words, it's going to say, we should do further studies.
Humans aren't prairie voles.
Like they all do. And so this was another one of the
humans are also not bonobos who manually stimulate their fellow female horde mates in order to smooth over differences in the yeah. Which doesn't frequently happen in humans.
So but these are very interesting studies of where they did test back and forth between both human and mammalian examples. From my own relationships, because I have had more than one long-term relationship.
Oh, do tell, do tell.
And I can tell you that they were affected. This
course,
very
yeah.
much, these studies, they do reflect some of the problems that I've had in my own relationships. And my wife and I have been together for 20 years, right?
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, we celebrate our 20-year anniversary this coming May of this next year. And we were already dating for a year before that. So we've already been together for 20 years. But we did have some issues. And it does relate a lot to what you see in these studies. We did have problems with the things that are mentioned in this study. So I can tell you right now that I can see where this study is correct on a lot of these means. So
Yeah. No, same here. I agree with a lot of it. I just think when it becomes deeply religious,
Hmm.
like at least from the evangelical side where I know a lot that push the purity culture, man, it just complicates things because you end up whipping yourself the whole rest of your life. And yeah.
Ding
Yeah.
ding. So there was another book. I wish I would have had to like literally like reserve this and have it shipped from the library. It's like not one of those things as an ebook, but there was this very interesting book I read a few years ago called Not My Under My Roof: Parents, Teens, and the Culture of Sex. Come on. Oh, that was it, the whole title. Not Under My Roof: Parents, Teens, and the Culture of Sex. It had the dot dot dot. And I didn't know.
Dot,
It's
dot,
by
dot.
Amy T. Shellett, and she or Shelley, I don't know. But so it was, she was studying for years, several, parents and their children, from both, I think it was in Texas in particular, but it was in America and in the Netherlands.
Hmm.
So, and what she found was the years ago, the Netherlands kind of like they like right when the church was getting like pretty up in people's faces, like basically at the time of like Humanae Vitae, like the Netherlands, like they had this like reckoning where they were just like the bishops were like nah, and the rest of the culture was like nah, and they kind of like decoupled from Catholicism. Like they were very conservative before then, um,
Mm.
and so they had a culture where they were imparting like basically the fundamental conceit of the book is that the average parent in the Netherlands would be okay with their teenage kid bringing over their um, girlfriend, boyfriend, and having them in the same bed, and having them do the deed under the roof. While the American one would not. And but when she peel back the onion, she wasn't finding that the parents in the Netherlands were promoting promiscuity or anything like that. They were actually very number one, they were being realists that like it was probably going to happen. So like let's at least sway things so that it happens in a safer context. So let's teach our kids about being choosy, not just going in the bed with anybody, but like actually be what does it mean to be in a caring relationship? Of course, teach them about multiple forms of
Did you
contraception.
say a Karen relationship?
Uh, um, so it was basically like this, like the Dutch parents, like they really valued like keeping the peace. So it was about like where do you put like an offense around this thing they're probably going to do anyway. Meanwhile, the American parents were very much like, you will not do this, you will not do this, you will not do this under my roof. So what would like basically it was like the idea was like if you kind of say no, it's just something you don't do, you and you don't give them any information about, like, if you were to do that, here's some things to think about.
Yeah.
Um, they will go and do it anyway, and they will sneak around. So they might have more partners, they might engage in riskier behavior. They, will do it sneaking around, and they will end up with, like, higher rates of teen pregnancy and STDs than the kids in the Netherlands who are being told by their parents, "Yeah, you could go do that."
There's
Hmm.
a third option.
What is that?
So in Southeast Asia, especially in countries like Laos and Thailand, and I believe also Cambodia, if two people are interested in being married, the parents will move them into their house, and at each end of the house, they get a bedroom. They're not allowed to couple. Instead, they have to find out if they're a good fit. They have to live under the same roof for up to 2 years. And if at that point they're still getting along, living in the same house without arguing and getting along, then they will allow them to go ahead and marry.
Why is that not a reality show yet?
So it's really interesting. So they're not allowed to couple, but they want to find out, are they going to argue about things? Are they going to argue about laundry? Are they going so they will have a bedroom on each side of the house to see if they can actually live under the same roof and not be contentious.
Netflix, this would be way better than Love is Blind.
Yeah.
Get on this right now.
Well, of course, there's always going to be something they argue about, or things that
But can they get through it though?
Yeah, I mean, I remember hearing once from a counselor saying, being in a healthy home doesn't mean not having dysfunction.
Yeah.
It means having the ability to deal with it and cope it and move beyond it.
Yeah.
Not the absence of dysfunction. But oftentimes with this religious, very, really hard line of purity culture,
Right.
it teaches that it's just bad. Just bad.
Yeah.
It's just, if you're not doing this to procreate for a specific reason, under marriage, it's just bad.
Yeah.
And like Keith's saying, the law of human nature kicks in.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're saying I can't have this one fruit in the garden. Yes, you can have everything else, but that one you can't. Well, what are we going to gravitate to?
Right. Well, and that's I kind of like the idea that do in Southeast Asia, and to show you there can be wisdom in other cultures, because those countries are all predominantly Buddhist, right? Like by a large margin, like Thailand's like 90% Buddhist, right? So is Laos. So if you look at these countries, there's great wisdom that comes out of their cultures, and it's not necessarily the church, but there's still really great wisdom that you can learn from them. And these are like, these countries have been around for millennia, and they've developed these cultures for long lasting relationships. I mean, these are the same. Look at the 8 Buddhist principles, right? And it goes through and teaches you non-attachment.
Yeah.
So if you look at the wisdom that's coming out of some of these other countries, they also have very, very low divorce rates. So, and they get along. Like I have had a plethora of Southeast Asian friends who I've been involved in their families, and they get along really well. Like it works. What they're doing works.
Yeah. You know what else works too? Like with my kids, and I won't say who they are or how old they are or anything like that. But we knew that we didn't want to raise them with the extreme form of, the purity culture thing and all of that, because we knew it didn't work. It absolutely did not work. And but at the same time, we didn't want we didn't want them being completely in a free for all society.
Yeah.
Where anything goes. You can have as many partners as you want. We didn't want that either.
Right.
But we didn't really want to steer hard in either direction. Because I just think it's part of growing up. Whatever you tell them, they want to shoot the other way.
Right.
So instead of saying, yes or no about that, or making it a hard, like giving them some of the consequences of like, I get that you're going to be attracted and that you're going to feel like you want to have sex, and you're going to keep pushing it. And you even tell yourself, oh, we'll just go this far. We won't go all the way.
Right.
We'll go this far. We won't go all the way. But inevitably you go all the way. But if that leads to a child,
that's something.
your mom and I can't be financially responsible for that. And we literally cannot.
Yeah.
That will be on you.
And it's going to lead to our next subject. But
and let me tell you, all different forms of contraceptions are for women, not always healthy for you and your body.
100% true.
B, don't always work. I can attest to that 100%.
Yep. I too. I can attest to that.
You know what does work? Celibacy.
Yes. Let's just say, without going into great details, my first 2 children were both births in extenuating circumstances, and there's no way they should have existed.
Same here. I remember having one. I'm like, there's no way.
Yeah, but they did. And they do. And they're wonderful kids. I don't regret them at all. They're awesome.
They are.
But under the circumstances,
Yeah.
yeah,
All right. You really wanted that to happen, God.
right. And it's and my son, to his credit, some of the younger generations are trying harder. Like my son is sort of kind of dating. He's a homeschool kid, and there's a girl that he's seeing, but they live in two different states, and they're seeing each other online and getting to know each other online, back and forth, long conversations and everything else. So they're actually getting to know each other without even being around each other. So they're spending time learning about each other. It's kind of cool. What if anybody familiar with telegony?
Huh?
Telegony.
No.
All right. So
See a prophet?
this sort of. So that leads us to our next subject. What if I'm going to pose a question to you? What if one of your children don't look like you? What if one of your children have traits that are a lot like your
spouse's
wife's
previous.
Does that mean that she was cheating, or does it mean that there's something else going on? So, telegony,
Got some questions,
influence
Lucy.
of previous mates. A recent research has uncovered that some surprising biological consequences of sexual activity that may support arguments for celibacy, particularly for those concerned about genetic purity or pair bonding ability. Studies have found that male DNA is commonly present in the brains of women, likely originating from prior pregnancies with male fetuses. This DNA, which I'm going to come back to this, this DNA was detected in 63% of female brain samples examined and was distributed across multiple brain regions. The DNA appears to persist for decades, with male DNA found in the brain of a 94-year-old woman. While the full implications are unknown, this suggests that sexual activity resulting in pregnancy, and again, I'm going to come back to this, leads to long-term genetic changes in women's brains. For those wishing to maintain genetic purity, this provides a biological argument for celibacy. The concept of telegony, that offspring can inherit characteristics of a mother's previous sexual partners, has found some scientific support. A study on flies demonstrates that offspring could inherit traits from the mother's previous mates, even when not genetically related. Similar effects have been observed in other species. This raises the possibility that a woman's previous sexual partners could influence her future children, even if those children are fathered by a different male. For individuals concerned about genetic lineage, this presents another argument for celibacy or highly selective mating. Newly discovered non-genetic mechanisms break the link between genes and inheritance, thereby also raising the possibility that previous mating partners could influence traits that in offspring sired by subsequent males that mate with the female, which is called telegamy. In the fly, and I'm going to try to pronounce this, Tetosilenus augusticalis,
Zute.
male transmit their environmentally acquired condition via paternal effects on offspring body size. We manipulated male condition and mated females to two males in high or low conditions in fully crossed designs. Although the second male sired a large majority of offspring body size was influenced by the conditions of the first mate. This effect was not observed when females were exposed to the first mate without mating, implicating semen-mediated effects rather than female differentiated allocations based on pre-mating assessment of male quality. Our results reveal a novel type of transgenerational effects with potential implications for the evolution of reproductive strategies. So on the corroborating study, there's another one. This one is called Uterosomes, the lost ring of telegony. And this is a separate study. Telegony refers to the appearance of some characteristics of the female's previous mated male in her subsequent offspring by another male. According to evidence, telegony may occur either through the infiltration of sperm into the somatic tissue of the female genital tract or the presence of fetal genes in the mother's blood. It is highlighted that sperm penetrates into the mucosa of the uterine and possibly alters the genetic structure, affecting the embryo and enduring from one pregnancy to the next. which may be one of the potential mechanisms of telegony. Uterine fluid, uterine gland-derived histotroph, supplies key nutrients for successful embryo implantations and is important during the first trimester, especially because of its susceptibility to maternal states. It goes on. The presence of EVs in uterine fluid, urosomes, was reported in mice, sheep, and humans, including a wide range of biomolecules such as proteins and non-coding RNAs. In this review article, we presented a new idea to explain telegony. Based on our idea, after the previous male sperm entry into the female reproductive system, those sperm which do not participate in fertilization penetrate into the somatic cells of the uterus and store their epigenetic information there. The sperm of the next partner reaches a location in the female reproductive canal where it exchanges information with the uterosomes and obtain the proteins and non-coding RNAs required for fertilization, development, and implantation. So, now there are some corroborating studies that have been done on this, but it's very interesting that in the corroborated study for this, it was on brain studies, and it was actually really interesting because the brain study was done to find out about ladies' brains later in generations. And at first, it actually confused one of the scientists because they didn't understand why they were finding male DNA on their brains. But what was really interesting is that at first, the study, they thought it was just based on fetuses. Well, they had male children, right? But then in a large portion of the study, which I believe was about 63% of it, they never had a male child. So then where did the male genes come from? Well, they had all sexual related couplings. So it's very interesting that through all of history, they should be very, very careful about who you sleep with because it could have ramifications later in life. And now we're learning that those actually may not only just affect your future children, but you may actually be carrying some of that up until you die.
I always thought of that as an old wives' tale. I remember my parents used saying to me, be careful. If you're going to go out there and do something like that, you're not just sleeping with the person you're sleeping with. You know what I mean? That concept.
Yeah. Well, it turns out that there might be a lot of corroborated evidence for this. Now, the studies are ongoing. I will say that. And the studies, there's some studies that tried to throw this out. They're like, no, this didn't actually happen. But if you go into the studies, they could not account for the reason why there was still male DNA in the women who didn't have male children. And they tried to accommodate for things like, well, maybe they had a twin that was absorbed by the mother, or maybe they did that. And even after factoring those in, a large percentage of the females still were not accounted for when it came to male cells within their body. So there definitely is room in these further studies to look for stuff like that. But there's enough corroborated evidence, and there's enough studies out there, and they try to factor in different ideas. Like the first study was more on flies, right? And then the second study was on the uterosomes. So those are two different studies that kind of corroborate each other, showing you that there is definitely something to this.
So there was this actually reminds me of another book I was reading, A Brief History of the Female Body, an evolutionary look at how and why the female form came to be by Dr. Dina Emera. And it talks about in all these different processes, like how did we get to like where like women made eggs and males made sperm. And it goes on, like kind of how did we get to the point where we had like, pregnancies inside the body from eggs and all these things and these bombardments of these cells, like basically like it talks a lot about like the evolutionary competition almost like between like the male and the female, like everybody's body and the fetus and the mother even, like they both have their own survival concerns, even as our relationship is ongoing and is symbiotic. And when you think of all the bombardments of cells, like the modern studies don't surprise me much that there would be, DNA present like post pregnancy that pregnancy, obviously pregnancy changes you
Oh,
drastically
absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
it's a huge endeavor
Yeah.
upon the body. And it is in sense the body actually responding in a way to an invader.
It kind of, yeah.
And it even though it is nurturing the thing, it's also defending itself against the thing at the same time.
Yes.
That's where like that's why like the placenta exists. And why menstrual cycles exist. Like
Yeah.
it's defense against invasive cells. So that said, I think there is a difference between like what these studies are showing, like this presence of DNA and like the classic theory of telogyny, which was like that like you would actually like inherit significant traits from a previous lover or whatever. Or
Well, I
mate.
mean, again, that first study says that they actually they duplicated those effects to see if it did happen, and it did happen. So
Right, but we're not talking like you're gonna, like you would look like a completely different person or something. Like your DNA is predominantly the vast majority is from of that half is from
oh, it absolutely
the
should be.
actual, yeah.
But there is according to the corroborated studies, and again, these are studies that are ongoing, but there is enough evidence to show that it still could affect the outcome. Like if you go back to the one on the flies, it shows that they were able to affect the size of the flies in the previous mate, even though it didn't lead to the impregnation of the fly. It still led to the second litter having a larger size based on the first mate.
Yeah. But
So-
also fruit flies are like there's a very small number of genes at play. So any impact you have on a single gene on a fruit fly is going to have an outsized impact compared to a human.
And there's definitely that. But yeah, there is enough ongoing studies to show that there is some play inside of that.
But besides that, like even if it had a significant impact, genetic impact, like I think it kind of underscores why we shouldn't be concerned about genetic purity. Like nothing good really comes from that.
Mm.
And that's where a lot of like that, you know, this the virginity kind of thing where it's like, you have to have the, pure virgins for the pure society. Like that's where like we see, some of the trad bro, whatever stuff where they're like, here's I don't know. I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. But like I don't really want to describe it. That's the problem. Like the uh, if my kid was 1% inherited their traits from my wife's previous partner, that shouldn't matter. Like that's my kid.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm not
And
saying-
it's we're still talking like one far less than 1%.
yeah.
It's not going to lead to, any sort of like better outcome for my kid. That is my kid.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that should affect that at all.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is it does lead you on the road of maybe I should not be involved in the hookup culture because it could affect things down the road, right? Number one, it could lead me to not being as attached to my mates, right? And I might have ongoing relationships because now I can no longer find satisfaction in coupling. But that it could also affect when I finally do find somebody I'm compatible with, it could affect how my offspring come out, right? So it does lead to the ideas that I should be looking for real, sincere, long-term relationships. I shouldn't be looking for fun, right? There should be more responsibility involved.
It is crazy to think, though, to think that a part of your DNA could be left behind. No, boy,
Yeah.
it definitely makes you want to.
But really it's
think
actually
twice.
her DNA at that point. It's not the previous partner's DNA in a sense. It's been integrated in her DNA.
It has.
And the whole idea, like,
Yeah.
I think we forget about that like DNA could change over time. That like you could have mutations over time.
You could.
And it's like a really like because it's just another chemical in
Yeah.
your body. Like
Yeah.
swap a protein. What's preventing that from happening?
But it is interesting that the scientists were able to define that it was separate male DNA that was in the body, or actually, sorry, I should say in the brains, because as he was dissecting the brains of the different cadavers, that's where he was finding it. So it's very interesting to see that it does reside within her, but you can also see it as something that's also separate.
Yeah. And I agree with you, Keith. I mean, that shouldn't matter to us so much now.
Right.
But
I don't think it should have ever mattered.
I bet you it does matter to royal bloodlines.
Absolutely. Because they want nothing but another related person to fall in love with.
I mean,
True.
it is important
It would compromise
select-
inbreeding. I absolutely agree with that.
to a select few of groups out there. It does matter.
I mean, that it's not your cousin from your uncle, you know, who is the Duke.
All right.
So, but it's very interesting. So I figured that this would be a fun, interesting one for us to get into.
Reminds me of you guys ever see The Grinch with Jim Carrey?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Honey, our baby's here. Why does he look like the mailman? Oh no, he says it looks like your boss.
Yeah, I love Jim Carrey. Yeah, so and Keith, you want to go through it? There's all the citations and studies and everything else.
Yeah, I was able to Google that one. That was
I've never heard of that. That's kind of fascinating.
It's really interesting. And some of the studies will try to throw out those studies on telegamy, except the corroborated studies that were done on it actually do reflect that there is a lot of stuff to dive deeper into. It's just really interesting. And so
Sure,
people really need to be very sincere and reflective when they get into relationships. Make it mean something more than am I going to get off tonight? Right?
Yeah, right.
But if you got off tonight, like tomorrow's a new day.
Oh, Keith.
New potential options.
But I think that's like a really important message. Like so many people are carrying baggage around because they're worried about how their church judges them, how their peers judge them, how their future partner will judge them. I remember like having this like confessional moment with my future spouse where I was like, I'm like thinking from the time I start the relationship, I have to like admit that I'd like done some stuff before.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like this like sacrament in like purity cultureism that you have to do this.
Yes.
And like
I know.
being so like afraid and crying and stuff like that. And it's like that's statistically like almost everybody. Like
one of the first bands I was in, it was a Christian band, and our lead singer, I won't mention any names or anything like that. We would do devotions before. This is how religious we were back then.
Yeah.
We would have a devotion prayer before we would play out and do our gigs. And he's like, guys, I got something to confess. And it's me, another keyboard player and a bass player and the guitarist and me. He's like, guys, he's like, I masturbated before.
I knew where this was going.
Whoops.
And I fell out the seat laughing.
So all right, I gotta tell this. So all right, like I'm getting into this like, you know, like Christian, you know, campus group in my freshman year of college. Like I'm like feel like this is my friend group, you know, and then so I'm big into the, you know, this, you know, parachurch organization, and we're going to retreats and we're learning that we all need to have accountability partners. And me, like, this is heaping on, like, I already have like nascent scrupulosity at this point, because I'm like, at that point, I'm like a recovering, like lapsed Catholic or unrecovering lapsed Catholic. And so I assign my accountability partner, like we barely know each other, and like I just sat down at lunch and I just have to be like, I wanked. Like, like that's how you start a conversation with somebody in this whole arrangement.
Ouch.
Yeah, but this idea that you had to do that.
Yeah.
Or else you couldn't go on. There's no way you could your talent's not gonna pull you through the gig.
Right.
You know? You had to confess that. Such a weird thing.
I do wonder, so because I do have a couple of friends, couple different couples I know who they have always been with the person that they have known their entire life.
Mhm.
There is a closeness that is there. You know, and they've been together, like one couple is like 20 some years, and one's like 30 some years, and there's a closeness that's almost hard to describe between them. And so you have to wonder if it's because of that first time pair bonding and never separating, they were able to develop a bond that seems to transcend what I see as regular married relationships. There is like for lack of a better term, there's this very symbiotic bond that has happened with them, and they've never known anybody else. So it does make you wonder.
Yeah.
I gotta be frank, I think it's luck. Like, because we have seen the receipts of like couples, you know, who have written their testimonies coming out of purity culture where they did try to do that and it totally fell apart. Like the memoir from Josh Harris's wife, you know, the I Kiss Dating Goodbye guy
Oh
who
yeah.
later disavowed the book and left Christianity and got divorced. Like she was writing down about, you know, they kind of like almost did the marriage to like write this book about, you know, not to write like exactly, but like they did all the right things and it didn't work at all. And like I think a lot of it comes down to temperament, like, or like in the cases, like, because everybody has baggage, everybody has stuff that like
Yeah.
hinders their relationships. How you overcome that? Some people work through conflict better than others. I think what we're seeing, I don't know if we have like a actual study other than like ongoing divorce rates or something like that, but I think you see people coming out of a strong cultural standard that you have to do it this one way. We're as in aggregate, we're not necessarily seeing better marriage outcomes, but we are seeing like a difficulty. For instance, you know, the kind of the whole like you have to shut off your sexuality until you turn it on. We're seeing actually there is studies in a way. Anybody heard of Sheila Gregor?
No.
She does. He's I don't a Christian sex educator sounds like the wrong word. She's like a Christian sex like researcher in a way. Um, Still actually very on the conservative end as far as I'm concerned, but she's Canadian, so I feel like they're like more chill about it. I don't know, don't quote me on that, but actually quote me on that. Canadians are more chill about it. Um, but she actually did a survey. I think she's done multiple of these now, like 20,000 women, 20,000 couples, massive surveys. You know, like whether you grew up in purity culture, basically not just like whether you grew up in it, but like actually like how do you resonate with certain phrases, like the damaged goods thing was probably incorporated into one of those questions. And she actually surveyed, it might not even be just her. There might be other studies too, but they actually found that if you had these strong purity culture messages, women were significantly more likely to have vaginismus in marriage. So, and what this is, it's an involuntary contraction of the vaginal muscles that makes intercourse impossible. And it's like this like physical psychological connection issue, and you have to go to therapy and like some like physical and mental therapy, but basically it's like this like overwhelming of like you heard so much about how you're not supposed to think about sex,
Yeah.
and then you go in to have sex and your body freezes up, and it's significantly more likely among Christian women.
Yeah, that would liken it to being trauma based, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
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 There was, and I didn't pull it for tonight's episode, there was a study that was done statistically on partners who were one time versus multiple times. And the divorce rate was almost non-existent among people who have only had one partner. It was a fascinating study, and how much more likely divorce was and separation was once you included multiple partners.
I'd have to see that one because that makes me think of there used to be this NFP educators.
I will add, it was a completely secular study.
I gotta see it. 'Cause what it's making me think of, and I'm not saying it's the same thing, but it's making me think of is there used to be like it was a very common thing if you were an NFP educator that you would cite that like the rate of divorce in the NFP is natural family planning, so it's basically birth control the Catholic way. I'm being very reductive here for the sake of time, but like it was like the divorce rate among NFP educators is 3%. And of course, these would always be like very predisposed towards like single partner kind of things because they're
Right.
growing up in like conservative Catholicism. And it turns out at like at one point that got changed to it was like 3% of NFP educators. So that's an impossibly small audience. That's like maybe 100 people across the United States. And then like we kind of found out there was actually no source for this at all. Like we can't find where this number came from. And it gets cited over and over in Catholic sex education seminars.
Yeah, I'll have to
It's
look.
AI generated.
I'll have to look at it for a follow up. But yeah, there was, and again, it was a completely secular one I had pulled. It was based on divorce statistics, and single-time partners, it was almost non-existent. Most of the divorces that happened were, one, long-term cohabitations, and then two, multiple partners. So I'll have to find it, but but it was fascinating to see that there was such a low divorce rate among single partners who had waited for marriage and hadn't just jumped into a relationship. So, which, I mean, honestly, if you look at, it makes sense, because people who are waiting to get into relationships obviously are thinking more deeply about it.
So here's one avenue I don't think we kind of got into tonight, but I want to bring up before we close the extreme view of celibacy among leadership within church, and like the evangelical church. I'll bring up since I'm evangelical. Feel free to bring up whatever you want. But, when it's so hard lined and so strict, I feel like those who become in positions of leadership and authority, I can think of 5 off the top of my head right now where they either, like youth leaders, ended up being in an abusive sexual relationship with their youth,
Okay.
and pastors with their with people in their shepherd, in their flock, so to speak. Um, and so I think what this doesn't really address is the component, like I mentioned earlier, of human nature, like just being able to acknowledge, wow, yeah, I do feel this way. I totally find this person attractive. Um, I actually want to have sex with them, or whatever it is that you may need to be honest with yourself, but you can't be honest with yourself, and you
Yeah.
certainly can't be honest with others about it, especially if you haven't quote unquote done anything yet. But the standards to which Christ raised it up, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Or even if you look at a person lustfully, it's hard to live by,
it is.
especially in today's society that, you end up doing something way worse than you had sought out to ever do from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's like it's repressed in these groups for so, like the youth past the 23-year-old youth pastor, like hitting on or worse to the 16-year-old like kid under their care is such a common story. It's like endemic almost.
It becomes predatory, for sure.
And like it's almost like it feels like, from like, if you try to look from the outside, that there's so much repression going on that when people like act out, it kind of just explodes. That's what it feels like when we go you go from like strict chastity, celibacy, if you're, a priest or whatever, to suddenly like, you know, giant stash of child porn, sexual abuse, sexual coercion of minors. Like,
Oh.
holy crap.
Going to one extreme.
Well, no, what I'm saying is like it feels like every day we have another story of this
Yeah.
in the church. And in the church, I'm saying the church everywhere.
Right.
Like, after we got done with, the latest round of the Catholic, sex abuse scandal, we got in the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was at least as bad.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that one was a mind-blowing one.
It's all bad. And I think there's something wrong with the system in a sense, on how we interpret that theology that's enabling this or keeps fueling it.
Yeah.
It happens over and over with similar teachings in the same group, and that's what I can't get over. Despite, like, being, like, reading the catechism, being like, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense."
Yeah.
Reading these books and being like, "Yeah, it makes sense," and then I just see this stuff, and I don't know what to do anymore. I
And-
don't know what to tell
Wait,
my
did
kids.
you just call it catechism?
Probably. That root beer is having me slur my speech already.
And that's where I think
5%, 5.9% my rear end.
spiritually speaking, that's where I think, at least from, Protestant church side, grace never equates to the law, right?
Right.
It's never matching up. We got a lot of law, we got a lot of rules, we got a lot of, do's and don'ts, but grace never seems to balance out
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
So
What I wanted to see, because I've been trying to think of solutions for this. Like, so you're in a context where, like, this is what your church teaches or whatever. And like, how do you present this in a decent way? And the one thing I keep thinking about, I think I've said this on here before, but I don't know. It's been a while. Um, is like, let's tell the whole truth inside of context where we talk about sex. So like, let's tell like go into a Catholic, group that's talking about this, a marriage group, even like, for in an age appropriate context, like a youth group, and say like, hey, these are things, this is what the church believes, and this is like what's out there. Like, so like, okay, here's this message about chastity, no sex before marriage, what we think about contraception, and then here is like what safe sex is. Like, just lay it all out there. And because I feel like what happens a lot in these contexts is because you talk about the church teaching part, and then we have to like bring up like um, you know, things about like the damaged goods, like or soul ties. Like soul ties gets brought up over and over, even though it's not a biblical concept. It's almost like voodoo or something like that. But it's like, or we bring up the classic one, especially in Catholic circles, is that oral contraceptives are abortifacients, even though like we've actually found that's actually like not true. So like that doesn't make or break Catholic teaching. Like, let's just not say that, because what happens is like people are going to either believe the teachings or not believe the teachings. But if they get to a point where they believe the teachings and they found out later that their teachers lied about like just like straight out facts, like that are common knowledge in the rest of the world, that's the betrayal of trust.
Yeah.
And that's where they're gonna throw out the whole thing. And I feel like if these things were taught in an atmosphere of trust where the teachers are accepting the mainstream science, are presenting all the information, are being realistic about what might or might not happen to you, um, like that kind of atmosphere, you might still walk away from those teachings later on, but you will not feel like the teachers betrayed your trust by trying to sugarcoat it.
So get this, and I know you're not going to believe this. The top 3 industries that involve divorce. Number 1, dancers. Number 2, bartenders. Number 3, massage therapists.
Whoa.
I'm like, how many freaking dancers are there? That's just like wild.
Right?
Like,
now,
top level dancing's a pretty like small group.
Keith, be really careful, because the next 2, the 4th one is gaming cage workers.
What?
And number 5 is gaming service workers.
Wait, like gambling stuff.
I'm assuming. I don't know.
Okay.
Now, professionals with the lowest divorce rates include farmers, podiatrists, clergy, optometrists. That's probably because they can't see the other partner. And agricultural engineer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I can't concentrate on this because I'm thinking once you said podiatrist and optometrist, like those like fake medical groups that would come out to like say like we have these grave concerns as a bunch of doctors about the vaccine or whatever. I said the V word, but
Say that.
yeah, no, seriously.
We are pro-vaccine. Please consult
Yeah,
your
it's
doctor
absolutely
for health.
well. That group of groups of doctors that were talking about speaking to medical concerns that benefited a certain political party over another, it would eventually come out that it would be like a bunch of podiatrists or optometrists. Like it would always be doctors that had nothing to do with whatever medical concern we're talking about.
Gotta get you saying.
Interesting.
Yeah. Pretty cool. All right. Well, this has been fun and entertaining. Keith, any last thoughts?
I really enjoyed like the traversal through all the interesting angles of chastity and monogamy. I had a bunch of like things about polygamy that I still didn't get to, but that'll have to wait for another time.
Well,
Because
okay.
I was watching The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Anybody watch that?
No.
Oh God,
that's
don't.
for real? That's a thing?
I mean, it wasn't the police. It wasn't like the fundamentalist LDS or anything like that. It was like TikTok influencers and like following them. So it was actually quite boring. But it had Mormonism on the brain, so that was actually going into the history of all that in my research lately, trying to understand what were the true causes of the Utah War of 1857.
All right.
But to bring it back to what we were actually talking about, I still am kind of like overwhelmed by the feeling of like I feel like we almost need like a moratorium, at least talking practically about chastity, purity, and related topics, because we need to figure out what the heck the church's actual message should be that is healthy.
We could actually do an episode on that and bring in like a pastor and a priest.
Oh my God, that would be wonderful.
Yeah,
that would be so. I make them feel so uncomfortable.
We should so do that.
Oh,
we'll do a follow up on that one.
I'll just tell them afterwards, like, it's okay. I'm just playing a character on the podcast.
We'll put an asterisk on that one.
Must be Father for I sinned.
You have to do that afterwards.
We do confession behind this curtain over right on top of your weightlifting set.
Gumby, last thoughts?
Oh man, it was a good night. Good subject, man.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it trying to tackle this one. Learned a lot of new things, and there is nothing taboo over brew.
Yeah, obviously. Please check us out on social media. We're expanding what we're doing right now because we are back in session. Our hiatus is over. We hope that you keep up with us on Facebook and possibly Twitter. I'm not been real active, but we'll get active on that. And
X.
And we're expanding on X. And we are starting our expansion on YouTube right now. So, which we are currently live streaming on. So, Godspeed, good night, good fight.
See ya.
Peace out.